They all think it's big things.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Bob Zelish, and on behalf of the Manistee Tea Party, I'd like to welcome everyone. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Okay, we'll bow our heads. Before we begin our meeting, let us take a moment to thank the Lord for this opportunity to be here, working together toward the common goal of enriching our community, our state, and our nation. Guide us, Lord, so that we may be united in the spirit of mutual respect and exchange of ideas and goals. Help us to work together to be successful in our obligations to our community. As always, we seek your guidance and inspiration in all our thoughts and decisions. Dear Lord, we pray that this meeting will be a most productive and successful meeting. Amen.
Amen.
Very briefly, Mike's going to say a couple of words about the recording that he's doing.
Briefly, you didn't come to I'm Mike Jones. You may have noticed I've been recording these meetings. If you don't get TV 189, not to worry. If you have a laptop, go to Manistee TV, click, wait, then go scroll down to YouTube, click, and then all kinds of programs are going to come up, and you just got to go down, 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 until you find Tea Party, or whatever else you want to find. I've got a lot of programs on there. I don't put the programs on TV as it's done through the channel at high school. Click. There it is. There'll be a lot of programs on there. Manistee TV, YouTube.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Yeah. Okay, just a couple of short announcements before we get started. June 2nd is Manistee County Republican Party annual Lincoln Dinner. It's going to be in this very room. And Representative Jack Bergman will be here to speak. Our next meeting will be on a Wednesday, June 20th. We had to move it from our normal Thursday, bumped it up a day. Our speaker is going to be the Republican candidate for Secretary of State, Major Mary Tretter Lang. Should be a very interesting presentation. She's running for Secretary of State. She has an extensive and varied background. She's worked in major accounting firms, KPGLG, worked for SBC and Meritech, and she ended up being Director of North American Sales for Lynx Technology. Her expertise, and I guess her passion, is in computer security, which is certainly a topic that everyone's interested in, certainly with the elections and the voting.
Has she got somebody running against her?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know the name.
It's a real conservative guy from He's at Michigan State right now. He's fighting. He's in the belly of the beast fighting that beast right now. His name will come to me.
All right.
Two good people we got.
Okay, next month at our Wednesday meeting is our annual, we have a very, very short general meeting, annual meeting, that we have business meeting. We will elect our new steering committee members. If anybody wants to be on the steering committee, let us know. It's a fun group. We just meet once a month for a couple of hours. Moving on. Okay, we are talking about our annual picnic that we have with the Tea Party and the Manistee County Republican Party. We are going to have it on Friday, July 20th this year. Begin at noon over at the First Street Beach Pavilion. We're still working on our speakers. I've been talking to Tony List, who's Representative Bergman's campaign manager. They may want to come back, so tentatively he will be back then, be here June 2nd, but he'll also be back here to speak to that group July 20th, although that's not finalized yet. One of our candidates for State Senator, Representative Ray Franz, is going to be there speaking, and I'm trying to work on a couple of other speakers. Hopefully we'll have that finalized in the next couple of weeks.
You said July 20?
July 20th, Friday, July 20th,
At what time?
12 o'clock noon. Okay, get on very briefly. We've sent out the information on Professor Wagner. We won't spend all the time going over his background and credentials, but he currently serves as the president and chairman of Salt and Light Global. He holds the academic rank of Distinguished Professor Emeritus. He's an internationally recognized expert in constitutional law and good governance. He's lead amicus counsel in various matters before the U.S. Supreme Court, which is authored briefs on behalf of various Christian organizations. He's also authored written testimony, evidence, and briefs in such forums as the Swedish Supreme Court, the U.S. Congress, and the UK Parliament. His public service includes serving as a federal judge in the United States courts, legal counsel in the U.S. Senate, and senior assistant United States attorney in the Department of Justice, and as an American diplomat. He is writing is published in numerous journals, books, and other publications. Now with that, we'll welcome Professor Wagner.
And the most important part that he lives out is that I'm a Christian and husband to one wife and father of one of the kids. So to answer your question, it just came to me, the other person's name is Guzman, running for secretary.
Oh, okay.
Tonight we are going to put our seatbelts on because, especially the guy holding the camera, because I do move around a little bit, and we are going to go through what I'd like to do tonight is I'd like to spend some time looking at the culture, where we are now, how we got here, why we're here, how does it fit in the constitutional framework that we have, because I know you all love the Constitution. You see that there is something wrong going on in this nation. You perhaps see that we have a little reprieve right now. But what can we do to fix it? And that's what I want to make sure that I end with tonight, because I don't want to come in here, and I can do this, we'll go through and I can tell you all the crazy battles we're fighting in the culture war right now and how we're fighting these battles in these different places. But what I want you to remember as we're going through it is why we do this. We do this, first of all, why? Because Jesus calls us to be salt and light in the world. And we're going to maybe, I'll tell you, talk about some of the battles we're fighting for the sanctity of life and how we're representing people and protecting, your rights in the Supreme Court and other places. But we're not just doing that on defense. We want to be on offense as well. We want to fix the problem. There's a reason reason that we've gotten to the place we've got to when you have an unelected Supreme Court, for example, and an unelected administrative state that is making virtually, almost all of the policy in this nation, and then they don't have to face a job interview like most politicians do when, they have an election that comes up. So, are we divided or are we more unified in this nation than we've ever been before?
Divided.
And some of you all have some, gray hair like I do, and I'm losing some hair here. I'm looking back through all my years, and we've been through some times in my lifetime and in your lifetime. But I believe we are probably more divided now ideologically than we've ever been. Certainly more than during the Vietnam War. And I'm going to suggest that we're probably more divided ideologically than we were just before the Civil War. And how do we fix this? For many years you would hear politicians run, I'm going to bring us together. We're going to come together. Well, I understand that you guys are less about people running for office than policy, so you're going to get this. For policy to be made involves politics, and the art of politics has always been said to be the art of compromise. And so, 30 years ago, when I was a smart-aleck young, too prideful of a lawyer right out of law school working at the United States Senate, we would have an issue, and we would, on the one side of the parties, would care about the children, and we would care about the children, but we would disagree maybe about how to solve the problem. And then we would get together, and we would do that sausage making you talk about. And the process wasn't always pretty. In fact, sometimes it was pretty ugly. But every now and then, something good emerged because we reached some compromise. And then we'd go out with the other side and have a beer together at night, and we'd be laughing, and the next day we'd be in battles again with each other. I'm telling you, the Democrats and the Republicans, they don't go out after the battles and they don't have a beer together. Why are we so divided? Well, first of all, in order to compromise, you have to agree on the question. And we are now so divided in this nation that we no longer even can agree on what the question is. And so, for example, with regard to abortion, is the question whether a woman should have reproductive freedom over her own body, to have personal autonomy over her own body, to do whatever she wants to with that, including have an abortion, without the government interfering with it? Is that the question? Or is the question whether an unborn son or daughter that has a beating heart, that can feel pain when the doctor is extracting and killing it, whether that unborn human life is worthy of government protection? Which one of those two narratives is the question? Do you see what I'm saying? And I can go through on every single issue. We don't even agree what the question is. If we can't agree on the question, then we can't compromise to reach a solution. That's how divided we are in this nation. We no longer see the world through the same lens. We all in this nation used to see the world through the lens that our founders did. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All are created equal, endowed by their Creator with a capital C, with certain inalienable rights. Inalienable, that means it's actually a legal property term. That means it's here at the beginning, it's going to be here when Jesus returns, and it's not going to change government. You can't take it away. It's an immovable thing. Inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and property. That is the lens through which we all used to see the world. And what has happened along the way is that an unelected Supreme Court has changed the narrative. So that, and let me, I'm moving a little bit too fast. So we got to go back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God. And He creates this amazing creation that we live in. And you can go out here, unlike some of us that live farther down south, and you can look up in the sky and you can see the power of His creation. And you can see in the water and the fish and the birds. And each time He created something, He said it was good. And then He created man and woman. Go look that up, check that out, just so you know, because the other side's saying, no, He didn't create man and woman, He created whatever you want to be, including something in between. But no, He created man, and He created woman, and then He said it was very good. Now, God puts them in the world, and He gives them some guidance. He tells them, you know, you can do just about anything you want. Don't be eating from this tree of good and evil. And I got to tell you, when the good Lord is out there doing good and doing very good, it doesn't take long for the other side to, you know, take some notice. And so all God wanted us to do was to see through His lens and obey Him and do the right thing. And he made some rules for us, but that wasn't because He wanted to be oppressive, it's because He wanted to keep us safe. But you know what? What does the devil do? The devil shows up in chapter 3, verse 1, and says, did God really say? Did He really say that? Did He really say you would surely die? No, He didn't. Nah, you don't need to do that. The lie, the first lie. And He says, let me give you a different lens through which you can see the world. You can be just like God. You can be the one that decides good and bad and good and evil, right and wrong. You don't need God to do it for you. It's all about you and your personal autonomy and your identity. You get to make it up, and you get to see the lens, use the lens in the world to see. Now, I know we got some time tonight, but we don't got enough time I'm going to have to skip forward from Genesis 3 to 1776, if you don't mind. And at that point, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Why are they self-evident? Well, because God puts the law on our heart. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And our founders understood that. And so the promises of the Declaration we see in the Constitution in order to form a more perfect union. Now, what happened? Because when we created this nation of ours, it was a nation where we, the people, gave very limited amount of power to the government. Now, how many people in here have seen me speak before, or were at maybe the Constitution celebration last year or something? So we got a couple people. A teeny little bit of tonight's going to be a little review. But for the rest of you, this power cord is going to represent the exercise of government power. You all with me so far? Now, if you are going to exercise power, what do you first have to have? Oh. And we realized that when we were trying to get that working on the screen, nothing was showing up on that screen for a while. Did you see us all fiddling around up here for a while? Well, what happened when the light finally came on? We had a power source. Well, if this is the exercise of government power, I probably should have some red tape at the end, just to, you know, because when government uses its power, it usually makes some red tape. But if this is the exercise of government power, anybody in this building here, you know, or the executive branch, or even the Supreme Court, they've got to exercise power. What do they have to find? They've got to find a power source. What's the power source for our nation? The Constitution. So, it's going to get tricky here with my speaker. They've got to plug into a power source before they can exercise power. Let me give you an example. It's a kind of a famous example. It's called the Affordable Care Act. Now, people on both sides like to call it Obamacare. Probably just made people a bunch. I had a bunch of reactions. It's called Obamacare. Well, before Congress could pass Obamacare, what did they have to have? They had to have a power source. So you know what the president said? You know, you guys got some powers over in Congress. You got the power to regulate commerce, and medicine is just like commerce. And so the Commerce Clause says that you can regulate commerce among the states. So that's what we're going to say Obamacare is. It's commerce among the states. So plug into the commerce power right the law called the so-called Affordable Care Act, and I'll sign it. Well, it happened that way, and then guess what? Immediately after it was passed, it was challenged, and then the law then was taken, the exercise of government power, the law was then taken to the Supreme Court and looked at, and the Supreme Court reviewed it, and this is what you should always ask when you see government using power. What is your constitutional power source? What is your power source? You better have either a statutory or a constitutional power source. And then the second question you should always ask if you're taking notes is, assuming you have a power source, are you acting within the scope of that power source? How many people have plugged into a plug and then you put the hairdryer on, you put the toaster on, and you put the TV on all of a sudden? Well, now you're acting outside the scope of the power source and boom, you don't have any power anymore, right? And so, those are two questions, and those are the questions that were put before the court. What was your power source? Well, the president sent his lawyer up to the Supreme Court. He said, well, our power source for the Congress down there when they passed this law was the Congress power. It says right here, power source. Congress can regulate interstate commerce. And I got to believe if I'm a justice on the Supreme Court, I start scratching my head because all of us have been to a doctor, right? And when you go to the doctor, hanging on the wall, they usually like to put their license and stuff like that. Well, when you ever saw your doctor's license, did it ever say it was issued by the United States government, or did it say it was issued by the state of Michigan? State of Michigan. Now, what do we know about the Constitution? If that power source isn't listed in here, the 10th Amendment says all the rest of the power is reserved to the states. And guess what? The regulation of medicine isn't listed in here, and so it's reserved to the states, which is why the state of Michigan issues the license for your doctor. You with me so far? So now, they're trying to pull a fast one on the Supreme Court, and they say, no, it's commerce power. Well, these guys went to the doctor, they know that it wasn't, and so they said, you know what? This is a violation of the commerce power. It's not within the scope of the commerce power. Obamacare is unconstitutional. The law was struck down. Now, how many people read about that or heard about that? Because the press didn't cover it very much, and when they did, it was on page 47 of the New York Times in fine print at the bottom somewhere. And Obamacare was actually found unconstitutional outside the source of the commerce power. Now, unfortunately, there were lawyers involved, and I can say that because, you know, I was one part of my life. And a good lawyer, though, always has a good backup argument. That phrase, talking out both sides of your mouth, it comes from somewhere, probably from a lawyer. And that's what the president's lawyer did. He came up there and said, well, if you don't like the commerce power, and we don't want to say this very loud because we have an election coming up, it's really a tax. Because in the list of power sources that we give to Congress, we give them the power to tax. And so don't say this very loud, because not only is it a tax, but it's the largest tax ever imposed on the American people in the history of the nation. And the court looked at it and they said, the IRS is going to be enforcing this. It quacks like a duck, it waddles like a duck, it cracks like a duck. It's a tax. It's a tax. And so we have Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. The next thing that our founders, again, understood, because we are limiting government, is that even if we find that the government has plugged into a proper power source, the next question you ask is it within the scope of the power source? And if it's a proper power source, if it's within the scope of the power source, the next question you ask, if you're taking notes, is does the exercise of government power, does the law violate one of our unalienable fundamental liberties? Like our freedom of speech, or the free exercise of our religious conscience, or our right to protect ourselves by bearing arms. And the way that it had always worked was, if it does, then even if Congress had a proper power source, the law would be struck down. Almost like a circuit breaker. Think of it like a circuit breaker. Because the exercise of government power was being used in such a way that it was interfering with one of our fundamental inalienable rights. And so, the next step in the process that we have going on here is that the Affordable Care Act has been passed. It didn't take long before we see that the regulations passed by the administrative state by somebody who doesn't even have to face an election then took that law and said, well, that means that if you're a company, anybody in here work in a company or own a company? Or know somebody that does? That means that you have to participate in the abortions of all your employees or we're going to fine you millions of dollars. Now, something like Global, we want to educate and we want to equip the citizenry and the culture to go battle and engage the culture. But along the way, we do a little engaging ourselves. We have a legal division called our Justice Center. And one of our clients is a big company down in Florida, owned by a Christian, who all of a sudden was told by the Obama administration, we are going to fine you millions of dollars unless you start participating in helping to pay for abortions of all of your employees. He said, I can't do that. As a matter of religious conscience, I can't do that. So we sued the government and we challenged the Obamacare law, not arguing that they didn't have a power source. What are we arguing? We're arguing that the exercise of government power interferes with this man's sincerely held religious beliefs, and the First Amendment protects the free exercise of religious conscience. We all still together here. And I'll give you a little praise report. We got a federal judge right now that entered an injunction against, the government. We have a commitment from the Attorney General of the United States to settle these cases, and they have admitted that they violated the Constitution, and they have admitted that they violated the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. I'm getting a little bit antsy, and I'm getting a little bit angry because even though I was in the room in Washington, D.C. when the current Attorney General of the United States said he was going to settle all these cases, he's settled some of them, but he hasn't settled ours. Sometimes it's not the elephant, sometimes it's not the donkey. It's the administrative state. And so we have to be ever vigilant. But that's the way it's supposed to work. Why do you think our framers put a system together in such a way? I mean, that seems like, a pretty serious attempt to limit the exercise of government power when they created our country. So are we born good or are we born bad? I used to ask that question to my constitutional law students. 15 years ago or 20 years ago, they would, a fair amount would say you're born bad. But in my latter years, as I was teaching, I would ask that question, and I'd say 90% of the room or more said we're all born good, or at least with a clean slate. And then over in the corner of the room, sheepishly, there would be probably, most of the time it was a young woman. She was disagreeing, and I could see, but she didn't want to go against the grain. But I called her out and said, I can tell that you're disagreeing, and I'm gonna, let me guess. You are, you disagree with them because you are a mother, right? It was 100% yes. Why? Because I know we're not born good. Why? Because I've got kids. And if you give a rattle to a child, and the child's playing with the rattle, and now you introduce a second baby into the game, and the second baby crawls over, does the first baby say, oh yes, we are both born good, let me share this with you and we'll play together? Play together nicely. No, it doesn't happen. In fact, if that situation occurs, the first baby goes, no, it's mine. Now, just so you know, it's not a cultural thing. I've told this story, and I don't come to always use rattle, but I use whatever's culturally significant anywhere in the world. I'm continent after continent. All over the world, I've told that story, and every mother in the audience says the same thing. This isn't some culturally socialized thing. This is a self-evident truth. We're not born good. And our founders understood that, and so they separated power because they understood the power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and so they didn't want to put all that power in one place because they knew these babies that played with rattles when they were a baby would grow up someday and work in those buildings over there. And their sinful nature wouldn't have changed. Good book says we all have sinned and fallen short. Our founders understood that truth. Now, to be sure, they read a lot of stuff by the Enlightenment thinkers, and Montesquieu talked about, the separation of powers and stuff. But you know what? They also read the Holy Bible. They read Isaiah that talked about the king and the lawgiver and the judge. And so they divided power the way we understand it. First, even in the federal government, and then between the federal government and the states and the people. And gave only very limited amount of powers to the federal government, and said, if we haven't listed it here, then the states have to list it. And not only are we going to separate power because of the sinful nature of man, we're going to also add a Bill of Rights. We're going to put these self-evident truths into writing, and these liberties, like your freedom of speech, like your free exercise of religious conscience, like your right to protect yourself in the Second Amendment, these are going to serve as your individual liberties that serve as a limitation on the exercise of government power, and will stop government from acting, even if they have a proper power source somewhere else in the Constitution. That's how important those liberties were. Well, how did we get to where we were today? How did we get to this place where abortion on demand, partial birth abortion, and it's not just our nation. We are not too many miles from Canada. If you go into Canada, you go to jail for a very, very long time if you mess with a fetal eagle. If you mess with an eagle fetus, you go to prison forever up there. But if you have a physician kill your child as it's being born, you don't not only go to jail, that is your human right to do so. How did we go so far from a worldview and seeing the world through a lens of right and wrong and truth to one where it's all about me and my personal autonomy and my identity and everybody else get the heck out of the way? How do we get from a place where do unto others as you would have them do unto you to no, it's all about me? Well, there's your answer. A bunch of lawyers wearing robes with ink in their pens. And it happened this way. Government has always been able to, quite properly, and this is biblical, regulate unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct. That's one of the only things God delegated to government. The good book says, condone that which is good and punish that which is evil. That's government's job. Right? Now, you can go from Genesis to Revelations, and you're not going to find God giving government the power to raise your child or to make decisions with regard to your child. You can go from Genesis to Revelations, and you're not going to see God giving government the power to tell your church how to run the church and what to teach in the church. God does give government a very small thing, an important thing, maintaining order, and that involves regulating unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct. That's why it's against a lot of murder and steal. That's why government can regulate even sexual conduct. That's why it's against a lot of rape, and that's why we have crimes against sexual exploitation with regard to child pornography and all that. Well, if you want to engage in unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct, but you don't want government to have the power to do anything to you, what do? If you want to live this way, if you want to say it's all about me and my personal autonomy, and I don't want government telling me that I can't engage in unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct, you go to the Supreme Court, you find a few lawyers wearing robes with ink in their pen, and you say, change this conduct, and let's not call it conduct anymore, let's call it liberty. Why do they want to do that? Well, government can regulate conduct and stop you from doing it. What did we just learn about liberty? Liberty stops government from acting, right? And so let me give you a picture. Almost all the states in the nation had had a discussion in their states, and through the politically accountable elected representatives, they had an intense discussion, and they said the unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct of killing a child while it's being born is something we're going to make against the law. Right? Now, if you want to say, hey, no, it's all about me and my personal autonomy and my identity, then what do? You go to the Supreme Court and say, you know what, I don't like the fact that we've got somebody calling a partial birth abortion dangerous or unhealthy or immoral conduct. I want to be able to do that. That's part of my personal autonomy. I should be able to do whatever I want to do. It's part of my identity. And so what the court did, they looked and said, well, maybe there is a constitutional provision. First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to petition the government. Oh, I don't find it in there. I don't find this privacy, personal autonomy thing. Oh, let me keep looking though. And they looked and looked and looked, and he couldn't find it. So he put it under a really bright light, like this bright light here, and then all of a sudden, no, I still don't see it. Looked very closely though, but all of a sudden, realizing, emanating in the shadows of the Constitution, in the shadows of the, oh, look at that First Amendment, maybe that Third Amendment, maybe the Fourth Amendment. Oh, I think I see a P here. Squinted a little more, and the justice said, now I see an R emanating off there in the shadows. R, and then he started almost dancing like a cheerleader. Give me a P. Give me an R, I, V, A, C, Y. What do I got? Privacy, I found it! And if you think I'm making that up or exaggerating a little bit, go read the case Griswold versus Kennedy, because that is how it happened. And I'm not making it up. And he literally added a constitutional right to the Constitution. He said that word liberty, it must mean a doctor can kill the baby. If the woman wants to have personal autonomy and identity. And so, through a very Darwinistic, evolutionary process, they went from sexual conduct to abortion, to partial birth abortion, and they kept taking this privacy, personal autonomy, personal identity right that they created and added to the Constitution. And they kept adding more things to it and say, well, hey, that must authorize abortion. Oh, we got to strike down that law that stops the partial birth abortion. That's interfering with this new right. Oh, we got to strike down this law that protects that. Do we have any children in here? Because I'm going to be crude. Can I be crude? Because I'm going to be honest. Oh, we're on film, so maybe I'm not going to be that crude, but I will. There are certain sexual acts that if I describe them, you would know what I'm talking about, that are unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral. Not anymore. That's all about privacy and personal autonomy. And so it was inevitable, by the way, once you start that evolutionary process, it was inevitable that the Supreme Court would do what it did when the folks said, well, that must mean that we have to change the meaning of marriage. Because it's all about my personal autonomy. It's all about my identity. And at that point, we got involved. 25,000 African-American pastors and ministries asked us to speak for them in the Supreme Court. Because nobody would nobody wanted to represent them. And why? Because they wanted to speak truth. They were, and I'm telling you, this is 25,000 churches and ministries, I think representing 4.7 million African American people, and they wanted to send the message to the Supreme Court that, look, you gotta stop ignoring science. People keep saying it's the same thing as race. It's not the same thing as race. One is a behavioral choice, one is a immutable characteristic that the way God made us. When the Obergefell same-sex marriage case came down, that's about the time that I read the case, and I knew that we were in trouble in our culture, but I read the case, and I knew we were our nation was at serious risk, because the case is actually only this much about same-sex marriage, and it was this much about how we were going to change the way we govern our nation. Where now we were going to say that unelected Supreme Court that never has to report to the people can change the meaning of the Constitution, and they locked into the Constitution a process that says, oh, your religious conscience? Guess what? We've now created a new right of personal autonomy and identity. Do you see these two lenses? Do you see these two worldviews now on a collision course with themselves? And if you don't, let me give you a picture. The pastor is sitting there. He's exercising his free exercise of religious conscience, teaching the Word of God in his church, and two men come in and say, I demand that you marry me, and if you don't, we're going to have the government sue you. So take all the social issue away, and look at this as a matter of proper governance. Who should be making these big decisions? Somebody that's unelected, that never has to face a job interview by you guys and are appointed for life? Or somebody, when they do something like that, has to face you at the voters' booth 2 years from now or 6 years from now in the Senate? And so I read that decision, and I got to tell you, my life was pretty good. I was making a ton of money. I was doing what I loved every day. I was teaching, I served as a federal judge. I was teaching the next generation constitutional law. And I was at the point in my career where I was going to be able to do a fair amount of fishing. And I read this case, and it hit me like a lightning bolt. 6 weeks later, my wife and I were debt-free, and now we are poor. But you know what? I've never felt more alive, because this is a time in our nation when we have to stop for a moment and understand that we stand on the shoulders of giants. And yes, there is going to be persecution to come. There is going to be unbelievable attacks to come. The question is, are we ready for it? And can we stop it? I think there's a chance we can. I think it's a small chance, and I'm going to show you how to do that at the end. Yes?
Talking about times getting worse before they get better.
Yeah.
My wife and I are heading down to Detroit this weekend. We have a step-nephew who's being ordained as a priest in the Catholic Church this weekend. In his class, a group of priests there are a good number of those people that believe in their lifetime they will be going to jail for the Christian beliefs.
I've got no question. And again, you stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, we joke all the time. I mean, had this been a different election, by now we probably would be. We almost did go to jail in Canada. There was I was speaking to a national group of lawyers, Christian lawyers in Canada. Came out from one of the sessions, and at the time we were raising our children, and we had a van, like a lot of people do, pack them up in. But my wife had a very innocuous pro-life bumper sticker. And it was a little picture of an unborn baby, and a very sweet picture of an unborn baby, and it said, choose life. That's all it was. Well, the car was vandalized and beat up pretty bad, and then with lipstick on the car next to it, they wrote abortion rocks and things like like that. Well, when somebody vandalizes malicious destruction of property, I think, well, I'll do what I used to do as a prosecutor. I was going to call the police and spectate. The lawyers that I was speaking to literally took the phone out of my hand and stopped me from dying and said, you can't call the police. I said, well, what are you talking about? Look what they did. And they said, if you call the police, in all likelihood, they're going to arrest you. And they said, you see that? He said, here that's considered hate speech. And then they went and continued to show me the cases where people were being prosecuted for their bumper stickers. And so, I mean, we are heading that way, but I got to tell you, remember, again, I keep saying we stand on the shoulders of giants. Those that came before us, that stood for truth, and especially stood as Christians, you know, they were drawn and quartered and faced horrible, horrible deaths. In all likelihood, that's not going to happen to us. What's probably going to happen to us is we'll lose our prosperity. You know, they will take away. How many people in here, while they were working or now as they're working, have some kind of license that they have to have? A fair number of the room. If it hasn't happened already, I'll give you an example. For lawyers right now, in every state, they're trying to add these provisions under the character thing. If you don't do bow the knee to this false god, we will take away your license. It's unprofessional conduct. And that's what they're doing to doctors and nurses, and they're going to do it to engineers and plumbers and anybody else, people that cut hair. And so, you know, there's a good chance we're going to face the possibility of losing our prosperity, and some of us will maybe go to jail for the words that we speak when we speak truth. But I tell you right now, you can take me to jail. I will not bow the knee to a false god. I just won't. I won't. I won't do that. That which God has commanded me to do, I will do, and that which He's commanded me not to do, if the government commands me to do it, I'm going to be like Daniel, and I'm going to open up those doors, and I'm going to do what God tells me. And I hope this will maybe encourage you to find that courage to do so when you face it 5 months from now. Yeah.
What's your solution to the situation?
I'm going to hold off on answering that question because there is a solution that involves you, that involves us, and there's a solution that is provided for in the Constitution. And I'm going to finish off with that, if you know. It's a little teaser. But I want to spend a little time just to show you that, you know, we know, I mean, what causes our division? In James 4, what causes the fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from the desires that battle within you? Well, if you look up the fights and the quarrels in the Greek, that's a series of battles and controversies. Well, my goodness, isn't that what we're facing right now? Same-sex marriage, abortion, whether or not a man should go into your little girl's public school bathroom and have the right to do that, and your daughter should be punished if she disagrees with it. I mean, one controversy after another, and that's what it's talking about here. When it says, don't they come from the desires that battle within you, fights and quarrels. But the desires, though, those desires that battle within you, that is actually a Greek word that talks about sensual delight. Basically, you know what it is? It means personal autonomy and identity in the way that the Supreme Court has been talking about. Times don't change too much from the time James penned those words to where we are right here. And that is, you know, there is a very clear explanation of why our nation is divided between these two worldview lenses through which we see the world. You know, it goes on to say, you adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world, friendship with the idea that it's all about me and my personal autonomy, friendship with the world means enmity with God. And adulterous ears, that's an unfaithful, you're being unfaithful to God, and exchanging that so I can have a hangout with the world and have it be all about me and my personal autonomy. That means enmity. The word enmity there, that denotes an idea of hostility. It says, when you choose that path, you are choosing to be hostile to the truth that God gives us. So therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world, anyone who chooses to say, hey, it's not about do unto others as you would do unto, as you would have them do unto you. It's not love your God with all your heart. It's instead all about me and my personal autonomy and my identity. And so, what are these current fights, quarrels that we're going to need to have a solution? How many people have been reading stuff about this guy that's going after all the crosses in Michigan? You ever heard about it? You know, you know the story of Saul in the Bible. He went from city to persecute Christians. Well, there's some guy in Michigan with his highly funded, organizations that are going around looking for crosses, and then he goes and sues these small little municipalities and says, you're violating this, and this is a fake, by the word, separation of church and state. First of all, there is no separation of church and state. Go read it in the Constitution. They talk about how Jefferson used those words. Well, he did. But read the letter that he was responding to. He was responding to the Danbury Baptists who were concerned that this new president was going to come interfere with their exercise of their faith, and he sent them this letter and said, no, the First Amendment, free exercise of religious conscience, means separation of church and state. Government, what it means is government cannot interfere with the church. It doesn't mean that people can't be influenced by sacred ideas. And so, we've got this guy going saying we need to take down all these crosses. And we've been involved fighting, helping some of these people fight this. Now, how many people also I'm going to stop right there and say, how many people also heard about the Trump national security travel ban? You've all heard, because in the national security travel ban says, what the government did is they said, we're going to have all our agencies going to look at all the rules, and when any country sends people in, we want to make sure that that country can show us that the people that they're sending us are not terrorists. And so we need to have enough information to know that. That's all it was. And if you can't show us that, then we're not going to, or until you can show us that, we're not going to have people coming from those countries. Didn't say anything about Muslims. Not a single thing. And some of the countries, in fact, in the travel ban, don't even have any Muslims in them. Now, a fair number do. Well, here's the interesting thing. The people that challenged the travel ban and said it was unconstitutional, and the people that are trying to take down all the crosses in Michigan are using the same argument. They're saying that both of those government actions are violating the Establishment Clause. You scratch your head and say, now wait a minute. I'm a good Tea Party person. I've read the First Amendment. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion. So we can't establish an official religious government. The Baptists can't come in and say, we're going to be a Baptist government and all legislation has to be consistent with our tenets. And the Lutherans can't come in and say it, and the Catholics can't come in and say it, and the Church of God people can't come in and say it. At the same time, the rest of the clause says, but everybody gets to have the free exercise of their faith, and the government can't interfere with that free exercise. Y'all with me so far? So how do we get to a place where the Constitution says you can't have you can't establish a religious government like a Sharia-controlled government? How does a cross sitting on a piece of property, or how does the travel ban violate that provision of the Constitution? And if you're scratching your head, you should be. You don't have to be a lawyer to scratch your head there. Well, the reason that these people are saying that is because they challenged some things one time and said, you know what, we want you to change the meaning of the Establishment Clause. We don't want you, Supreme Court, to say that the word established means established anymore. We now want you to say that it requires a secular purpose for everything you do in government. Well, and then the Supreme Court did that in a case called Lemon versus Kurtzman. Do you know what that means, folks? that now that clause, instead of saying you can't establish a religious government where all legislation has to be consistent with that religion's tenets, instead of that being the truth, which that is the truth, that's what it means, it now means that anytime government has a policy, they have to have a secular reason for it. It cannot be informed by a sacred idea. If that doctrine, if that legal doctrine was in place during the Lincoln administration, do you realize that the Emancipation Proclamation would be considered unconstitutional? Why? Well, let's step back to the Trump travel ban. They're arguing the Trump travel ban violates the Establishment Clause because the president, during the campaign, said some things about Muslims. So that must mean that his policy here isn't secular. Wow. That's before the Supreme Court right now. Lincoln, in the Emancipation Proclamation, declared that it was because of the favor of Almighty God that we have this Emancipation Proclamation. And guess what? He didn't say that in a campaign speech. He put it in the document itself. So if this crazy doctrine that these judges made up and added to the Constitution and changed the Establishment Clause means what they say it means now, the Emancipation Proclamation would be unconstitutional. Does a cross, putting a cross in a government park, does that create a religious government and require all the legislation passed by the government to be consistent with the religious tenets of the religion? No. So it shouldn't violate the Establishment Clause. But if you take the Supreme Court's new definition, does a cross sitting on government property, does that have a secular purpose? It might, but probably not. It might have an historic purpose, but it might. And so, do you see what they're doing? They're trying to say that all of us in the room are no longer allowed to participate in the policy-making process. Why? Not because we got good ideas or bad ideas, but because of what is informing our ideas. We see the world through this lens, don't we? Through a Christian worldview. And so if we go in and say, it should be against the law to steal because God says thou shalt not steal. Oh, you can't participate. That's not a secular idea. You've got to go away. Or you've got to come in and you've got to lie about the reason that you want a policy to be in place. Yes?
Isn't the Supreme Court, who gave them the power to do that? The Supreme Court, who gave them the power to do that? Isn't that unconstitutional? They can't change the Constitution.
We're getting somewhere, folks. Nobody gave them the power.
So that's...
So nobody gave them the power to do that. And because nobody gave them the power to do that, we have a solution that I am promising I will get to. That is a very good question. Nobody gave them the power to do that. I've already gone through how we got this fake right of personal autonomy and identity and how it now authorizes abortion. Well, guess what? That means currently, right now, that a baby's beating heart, even though it's pumping blood through the unborn son or daughter, a doctor still has the power to kill that and stop that beating heart. And government can do nothing about it, even though that's unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct. Because the court has said that's part of the personal autonomy identity right of the woman. Well, we just had a huge victory in Iowa. Iowa just passed what's called the heartbeat bill. And, I think like 16 days after a baby is, unborn baby's in the womb, its heart is beating, and not too long after that, it's pumping blood through the whole baby. And now there's a law that's going to go to the Supreme Court. Because, I gotta tell you, that early in the pregnancy, that goes right in the collision course with what they say is personal autonomy. And so, and I just found out on the way up here that I think we're going to be the lawyers in the case that are going to be actively involved with, fighting for that and protecting some of those speaking for those beating hearts. We have another case, that there's a custody dispute going on. And the father wants to kill the unborn child, and the mother wants to, have the unborn child implanted into her because they had the baby conceived, and then they put it in a storage place. I don't know how it works, embryo, and that went to the Supreme Court, and the most liberal justices on the Michigan Supreme Court sent it back to the court. It says, you first got to decide whether or not it's a human life or not. And so that's when we started thinking light bulb came on. And so you know what? If that question's going to be decided, the mom's got a lawyer, the dad's got a lawyer, that unborn child needs a lawyer. And so they have now currently a motion before the court to make us the lawyer for the unborn child. Now, if you think that sounds crazy, actually it happens every day, because there are unborn children where there are disputes going on with regard to inheritances down the road, and so lawyers are appointed every day to protect the inheritance rights of an unborn child. If a little kid that's unborn has the right to a lawyer to protect their inheritance sometime down the road, don't you think they ought to have a lawyer to protect their life when someone's trying to kill them? I think they do. Yeah. And so that's another cool thing that we're doing. And these two cases together could actually reverse Roe versus Wade, which would then send it back to the states for the people, once again, to decide whether unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct of a partial birth abortion, for example, should be against the law. Question?
I get in a lot of discussions about the rights of the unborn, and I'm sure I'm not unique in this, but 200 years ago, which was in 1818, the slaves had no rights, and most people agreed. So we ended up having a civil war over the rights of the slaves. And I say the rights of the unborn are 200 years behind the rights of the slaves, and they will get rights to life.
It's interesting you say that, because when I used to teach constitutional law, I would have to teach the law of abortion because it was part of the constitutional framework. The first case that I would present to them wasn't Roe versus Wade or any of these other cases we've talked about. The first case that I present to them is the Dred Scott case, because the first time in this nation that the Supreme Court said that some human life was not worthy of protection was in the Dred Scott case, the slavery case you just talked about. The second time that the Supreme Court said that some human life was not worthy of protection was Roe versus Wade. And I tell you, every time I taught that class, for all the years I taught it, there was some liberal, left-wing person that would come up after class with tears in their eyes and say, I just became pro-life today. Usually it was an African-American person.
They said what?
They became pro-life because they saw that, wow, this is the same thing as when the court said that the color of my skin may be not worthy. How much more, and so that is a powerful argument if you're ever out there engaging in the culture in a friendly way, trying to take somebody from the other side and bring them over to our side. Yes, sir.
Isn't this a way that the lawyers can make a hell of a lot more money?
How do you mean?
Well,
I know the doctors are making a lot of money.
lawyers
Planned Parenthood's making a lot of money, and it's coming from your paycheck.
usually make a pretty good cut of anything. They get a good fee if there's no money involved in it. Isn't that right?
Well, I can tell you, I'm not maybe on the other side, because the other side is Equality Michigan, for example. I heard that they just got $1 million last year. They're opposing everything we speak about tonight. Every time we're to fight, they're fighting us, and they got a battle of lawyers. They got $1 million. I heard that $125,000 of it came from you, the taxpayer. I literally have enough to take my gas to come up to Manistee and get back home. So we take all these cases. We never charge. We do this stuff for free, because usually when we're representing the unborn, they don't have a checkbook to write us a check.
I look at this as a case where common sense has gone out the window, and I blame that all on Theodore Roosevelt when he started the Department of Education back in 1905. I know I'm going back a long ways, But you gotta think how the series, the way they started escalating. And it still is coming.
We filed a brief in the Supreme Court recently. Because remember what I taught, we learned tonight? You guys probably already knew it. But first thing you ask is when somebody does something exercising government power, like creating a Department of Education, what's your power source? And you realize that at one time, Congress rejected the idea of the Department of Education because they didn't have a power source. So we recently, and I can't remember which case it was, we have a number of cases in the Supreme Court. One of the things we challenged was these Department of Education regulations. Not only we challenged the regulation, we challenged the constitutional legitimacy of the department in the first place, because nothing in the and I thought, wow, this was going to be a real novel thing, and people would think we're a little crazy for saying it. And then I started doing the research, and whoa, no, we had a whole Congress agree with us at one time. And so it actually became a pretty serious argument. And so now the question is, and I probably should get there because I've been talking for too long. I can keep going and going. I've got 50 different cases. We've got the Masterpiece cake. We've got that case in the Supreme Court right now where we're representing businesses that have been that have been persecuted. That's a very, very important case. If that comes down the wrong way, the Kate Baker case in Colorado, then the free exercise of religious conscience in the First Amendment has been written out of existence. And at that point, we'll have a very different kind of conversation. And I've never wanted to teach about civil disobedience. I've got a very good speech locked away that shows you the Christian and proper legal way when government commands you to do that what God commands you not to do. I hope I never have to give that speech. But if Masterpiece Theater comes down the wrong way, it will literally write out the First Amendment. It'll write it out of existence. I've been speaking for too long. I mean, I can keep going. We've got so many different things we're working on right now. There are school boards across the state of Michigan. We're representing one in a very tough case right now, where they're commanding that their little girls put up with men going into their restrooms if a man says, I feel like I'm a woman today. And if the girl complains, she's, being punished. You scratch your head. How do we get to a place like this? And, somebody's got to speak up for these people. And if I have no money and no house or anything left, I'm going to keep speaking until we do. But that's where we are right now. And local government after local government in Michigan is passing these things. Because why? Because they don't have control of the state government. They don't have control of the federal government. So they are, not, and every time they do it, half the time they're not using the proper process while they're doing it. They just try to shove it right through, no transparency. We've got to be able to stop this, and we're working on this in a number of different places. Our federal government funded Planned Parenthood in the last budget. Republican-controlled House and Senate and President. Now, some good news: the President just signed a piece of legislation that allows each state, if they want to not fund these organizations. Now, that means we got to get involved and get Michigan legislatures to make sure that it doesn't happen. All right, you came here for some answers. This stuff can work. It's a long shot, but it can work. Remember I told you that you had to have a power source before you exercise power? Well, and then you asked that very good question, well, where did the Supreme Court get them? There's no power source authorizing the Supreme Court to do what they did. So it's outside their constitutional authority to change the meaning of the Constitution and to evolve the meaning of the Constitution. There is something in Article 5. There's two different ways to change the Constitution. If you want to add a right of personal autonomy or identity, you can do that. You can do that. But it involves the people. Both those processes, both ways of doing it involves the states and involves the people getting involved. Under Article 3 of the Constitution, the Supreme Court has the power to decide cases, decide disputes, resolve disputes concerning the Constitution and you know, so that necessarily means that they do have the power to say what the law is, but that does not give them the power to say what they want the law to say. And that's where they've abused their power. So what do you do in that situation? Well, you look at some of the other power sources that Congress has. First of all, in Article 3, where the part of the Constitution that sets up the judiciary. The federal judiciary, under the Constitution, is a Supreme Court, and such other courts as Congress shall decide. So Congress, along the way, has set up federal district courts. You've seen the federal trial courts, you've heard about them. A federal trial court in Michigan, one judge undid the will of 2.7 million people with the stroke of his pen. All right, we saw that. We saw that type of thing happen. So Congress created those district courts. Congress also created the Court of Appeals, and Congress also has created and said there's going to be 9 judges on the Supreme Court. Well, if Congress wants to tomorrow, guess what? The federal judiciary can be Chief Justice Roberts at his desk. Think about that.
Say again?
The federal judiciary, the entire federal judiciary, tomorrow, if Congress deemed it so, could be Chief Justice Roberts at his desk. And the reason I say that is that the Constitution doesn't say how many people have to be on the Supreme Court. We've had different numbers over the time. So we could get rid of all of them except for one. We could get rid of an entire federal Court of Appeals, and we can get rid of all the federal trial courts. Congress has the power to structure the federal judiciary. And if they have the power to strip all these courts of their power completely, then they also have the power to strip the courts of different specific authority. They could, for example, and they have, in fact, very recently, said, Supreme Court, you can't decide this particular issue. Very quickly, it was prisoners would have a lot of time on their hands, so they file a lot of frivolous lawsuits, all right? And Congress passed a law that said you can only file X number of lawsuits. The Supreme Court struck that down and said it was unconstitutional. Congress then stripped the court of jurisdiction. They repassed the law again and said, court, you have no authority to decide this matter. And so if Congress wants to, if we the people put the pressure on the people who work for us, they could say, for example, court, you're not allowed to decide anything about personal autonomy or identity anymore. Nothing on abortion, nothing on this, and all these other cases are no good. So Congress has the power to what's called strip the jurisdiction of the court. We could even end the court. I mean, you can't end, you have to have at least one, because it says that Article 3 says you got to have at least a Supreme Court. So you got to have at least one member on the Supreme Court. But the federal judiciary could be that small. That has been something that Congress has used in the past. They haven't gone to the extent that I just explained, but they have stripped particular jurisdiction in particular areas of the court. That's one thing that can be done. The second thing that can be done is one of the power sources that Congress has, and we learned about the power to tax earlier, that's in there. That's one of the things you can plug into for their power. Well, if you got the power to tax, you also have the power to spend, because they take our money and then they spend it. Where do you think all that marble came from on that building over there? And where do you think all that mahogany, and those fancy desks, and all those books, and all those computers, and all those Wagners, where do you think all that money comes to pay for all that? It comes from us. Can you imagine if the House Appropriations Committee held a hearing and brought the justices of the Supreme Court into their hearing room and said, why should we continue appropriating money other than to your salaries? Because the Constitution says you have to fund this and you can't lower their salaries. But why should we fund anything else? Why should we pay for your marble? Why should we pay for the ink in your pen? Why should we pay for your Wagners, your computers, when you're acting outside your authority under the Constitution? In fact, you're using our power. You're exercising legislative power when you do that. Can you imagine if they just held a hearing and asked that question? What kind of shot across the bow that would be? That's one of the things I'm dreaming. Before I die, I want to see the House Appropriations Committee hold that hearing and ask that question.
But Congress wants it to be.
Well, and he says Congress wants them to be that way. And here's why that's true. They don't want to have to decide the hard questions like abortion and the hard questions, you know, like same-sex marriage, because they don't want to have to face the voters. And so we need to put people in Congress that are going to uphold, because I'm telling you, I worked in all three branches. I was a federal judge. I put my hand on the Holy Bible, and I put my other hand toward heaven, and I declared and promised that I would uphold the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, so help me God. And the reason for that is to remind the person taking that oath that no one is above the law, not even the king, not even a member of Congress. And you know, they've just kind of relegated that oath to just, oh, this is just a ceremonial thing. We need to restore the idea of what it actually means, so these members of Congress can't just say, oh, it's okay for the court to do it for us. The very last solution, and then I'll take questions. Another power source that Congress has, and I call this the hammer. The House of Representatives under the Constitution have the power to impeach a federal judge. And actually, when I was a legal counsel of the United States, then I got to observe, I wasn't the lawyer on the case, but I got to observe and watch an impeachment of a federal judge. He had been arrested and convicted of some type of economic crimes. He was sitting in prison and he wouldn't resign. And so he was continuing to collect his salary every week. Well, the House impeached him and the Senate convicted him. And so the House of Representatives has the power to impeach a judge, and the Senate has the power to remove the judge after impeachment. Those are three very significant power sources that Congress has, but will not use unless they feel enough pressure from the people. Enough pressure, that's the negative way of saying it, enough protection, you know, from the people. And so it's going to require a lot of citizen involvement and citizen activity. That's a little beyond my expertise, but I keep hoping at one of these talks I'm going to meet the conservative Obama acorn type person with morals and ethics who knows how to organize, you know, 50 million people, and we're going to get this done. We're going to get this done. Those are the constitutional ways that we can fix this country very, very quickly. That solves the problem of the judiciary. We don't have enough time to talk about the administrative state, but that's as big a problem where you've got these unelected people with all these agencies. You know, where does the same question that you asked for the Supreme Court, where do these agencies get the constitutional authority to exist?
EPA?
Where in the Constitution authorized, you know, and what's happened is the Supreme Court's kind of had to say, well, our country has grown so big, and Congress has said, we've grown so big, we can't manage the country, we can't do all these things, we need to delegate this to the agencies. Well, at one time in our constitutional history, there was something called the non-delegation doctrine, and whenever Congress tried to do something like that, it was held unconstitutional. Personally, I'd kind of like to see some form of the non-delegation doctrine come back. Or at least some way where we're holding Congress more accountable. And I'm going to give you some encouraging news on that. Some of the best lawyers and some of the best people I've seen in a very long time, and very large numbers of them, are working very, very hard right now, more than I've ever seen in the last 30 years, to drain that swamp. And I got to tell you, it's a big battle. But there's some good work being done to make that happen. Yes?
That was just the question that I was going to ask was, do you think President Trump is helping or hurting your cause? And I think you just answered that.
He's helping. I have talked to quite a number of political appointees, and the story they tell me is the same from department to department to department. They're there. But they are, and sometimes it's within the same, but even within the Republican Party. They are battling, and it's a battle every single place, but they're making some progress, and then they, you know, and so it's not an easy thing. It is a battle, because what you're talking about taking power away, you know, from somebody that doesn't quite rightly have that power, but they're still not going to give it up. You know, just like the baby with the rattle.
You won't hear about that either. It's all behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
How long does it
Federal judge is appointed for life, except for the kind of federal judge that I was. Yeah, her jaw dropped. Exactly, that's my point. These people, what do you call somebody who's appointed for life that can't be removed from office by an election, and then imposes public policy on hundreds of millions of people under the force of law?
Dictators.
That can take this poor company that we're representing in Florida and find them out of existence with millions of dollars. It's exactly what you said. It's a dictator. It's a tyrant. It's judicial tyranny.
Can Congress strip the life provision?
Absolutely. Can Congress strip the personal autonomy, personal identity, life type of provision? Life, and not just in the life area, but in the same-sex marriage area or all the other areas where they've taken that fake right and said, oh, that means that you can strike down a partial birth abortion law. Oh, that means that you can have same-sex marriage. That means you can engage in all this other kind of conduct that I'm not going to get into. That means that you as a man can say you feel like you're a woman and you go into the little girl's bathroom. I was in Peru working with their Supreme Court and their Congress, and somehow I ended up being there on International Day of the Woman. and it's a UN thing, so you can just imagine what it was. And I was saying, they got all these future leaders of Peru, we want you to debate this other person. They were trying to set me up. I said, I don't want to go in there. I'm going to go in the lions. This is lion, Daniel and the lion's den, or at least Meshach in the furnace. No, so I went there, and I was very polite. And they had this psychologist with all these fancy degrees, and get up there and saying to these future leaders of the country, the most important thing you must understand is identity. That's the most important thing for this nation, is that you need to understand identity. And your identity comes from within, and you can decide what it is, and it's basically socialized from, age such and such to age such and such, and so it's a social construct anyways, but you gotta decide it, and you gotta understand for the future of this nation that the most important thing of this nation is identity. And I'm looking, I'm thinking, there's my speech, it's gone. I threw it out. And I got up and I said to the person, I'm very impressed with all your credentials, and you are very eloquent. And I got to tell you, though, I'm not going to give my speech. I'm going to have to disagree, quite frankly, with everything you just said. And so I was very polite. And I started out and I said, he said that the most important thing for this nation that you need to understand is this concept of identity. And I said, that's not true. The most important thing you need to know for the future of this nation, the most important thing is the truth. The most important thing is the truth. And then I said, my new friend here got up and told you that it's all about identity, that, that it's a social construct, and you get to decide from all these influences what you want to be. And I said, I'm sorry, but that's not true. And remember what's the most important thing? The truth. I said, the truth is that God created these things called chromosomes. And they decide whether you are going to be a man or a woman. And that's the truth. And all of a sudden, all these people in the room that were way to the left, something hit them. You could just see that. I feel like I just won a debate, and I'd never been in a debate or anything. I'd never been in a high school debate class. But you saw God show up, is my point. And if you are respectful to the other side and you've got a good argument, they still may spit on you and do nasty things to you, but you get up and do good anyways, and I'm telling you, you never know what may happen. You never know what may happen. Yeah.
I hear you referencing they a lot.
I'm the employee.
And my question is, who is they?
Anybody that wears this lens.
Is that any particular group of people? And what's their end goal? What do they want to achieve by doing all this?
Their end goal is they want to take your faith and this lens through which you see the world, and they want it to be smashed, and they don't want you to be able to participate in the process. And that's the difference. they want, they don't want to have a battle of ideas in the marketplace of ideas where everybody can hear and the best ideas win. And let me give you an example of that. Most of the time, when I say they, the secular progressive left, humanists, these people, the folks that deny the existence of God and say it's all about me and my personal autonomy and my identity, it's not about self, it's not about what the Declaration and the Founder said, it's not about we hold these truths to be self-evident. They're not self-evident, there's no such, they will tell you there is no such thing as truth. And we are trying to say, no, there are some self-evident truths, there are some moral absolutes in the world. And I've debated many a professor with lots of letters after their names, and I just love it because, it's almost like too easy. They put the ball on the tee, and they hand me a bat. Because inevitably they will say, and especially when they do it with a Harvard accent, I love it, there is no such thing as a moral absolute, and for you to think so, you must be a Neanderthal. They'll do so, and then anytime you're being attacked personally, you're grading ground. And so, let me say it, because this is what they will, the exact same words. It's almost like they've got a script. There is no such thing as a moral absolute. There are no moral absolutes. And I just ask them, are you absolutely sure? What have they just done? They've just stated it. And so it's the folks that take that approach that want to eliminate us from the marketplace of ideas. And how do I know that? Well, I'm willing to debate anybody, anytime, any place in the world. What are they trying to do? They're trying to take speech and censor it and call it hate speech. Because remember what I said, the proper role of government was to regulate unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct. And so they went and took that conduct and they changed it into liberty so that they could do it. Well, just the opposite is true. The liberties they don't like, what do? They go find some judges or some unelected people somewhere, and they take that liberty, like freedom of speech, and they try to recharacterize it and call it conduct, because government can regulate conduct. And they say, that's not speech, that's dangerous conduct, that's hate speech, that's contempt speech, that's harassment. And so, so their tactic is the same, it's just the opposite side of the coin. The liberties that they don't want us to engage in, like freedom of religion and free exercise of religious conscience, they turn it around and they call freedom of speech, hate speech conduct, they call freedom of religion discrimination. And so their ultimate goal is to have the whole world seen through their lens with no opposition. Our whole goal is to have a free marketplace of ideas where the best ideas emerge and good government's controls. These are great questions.
I have a question. The one you haven't touched on yet, the Christian professor at Wisconsin University. It's Marquette.
Yeah, it's Marquette.
My alma mater.
Your alma. I'm sorry, you got a Christian university,
Jesuit.
a Jesuit university on top of it, St. Louis University, Jesuit. So I mean,
Jesuit.
so I can, and so you've got a Jesuit university with a Christian professor. The university has a mission that is very clear and is consistent with the Judeo-Christian principles. And this poor professor tries to back up a student by saying that this other professor that's, messing with him and saying you can't be in my class because we've decided all these issues about LGBTQ world and whatever it is, and so this other professor steps up and speaks on his behalf, and they fire him. We're going to win this one. This case is in the Wisconsin Supreme Court right now, and we're representing Christian professors from around the world on behalf of this.
That was part of my question. The other part was, have you actually tackled the interpretation or the ignoring at Marquette of their mission statement?
Oh no, we took it head on. It's in our brief. I mean, and that's part of the.
Because I that's an implication for a lot of the non-secular universities. I mean, they've already taken over control of the state universities.
And
But now
then-
you're talking about these little
Yeah.
universities that are.
And your local school board, right here, and I don't know about here, in Manistee, but certainly in Williamston, Michigan, for example. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, because that man is an example, like the man I told you about in Florida that has the company. I mean, he built that company his whole life, and he's employing a ton of people. He pays them way more, and he gives them benefits that no company has to give. But yet, the government comes in and says, because you don't do abortions, we're going to take your company from you. This professor, and I got to tell you, those of us that can do and those of us that can't, I went and taught, I mean, what's this, and so that's what they do. They, and you say, well, how did you get to be a professor? Well, I don't know how I got in under the radar. And once I got there, my conservative Christian principles were pretty evident. And the only thing I can say is that God protected me, because as soon as I got full tenure and as soon as I was, advanced in the ranks, that's when it got really bad. And I ended up being the spokesman for all these other people that were trying to get tenure, that they were trying to kick out. Not because they weren't brilliant professors, they were. But let's just, and I say that metaphorically around the world, because then I can show institution after institution after institution where that's happening. The good news is, some of them are slipping through and they're doing great things. Got a close friend right now, and I got to be careful because he's on the verge of a very high level appointment in the administration, and he fought those same battles, and he went there, and he got up every day, even though he was being attacked. It'd be so easy to go out and take that brilliance and make $1 million in the profession. But he stuck with it. He stuck with it, and I think God's about to honor it with just putting him in a place of tremendous influence. And that's my encouragement to you too. When this stuff happens, and even if it's friendly fire, get up the next day and do good anyways. Yes?
One more question, then we have.
What is the issue with, what's the issue at Williamston School District?
In Williamston School District, against, for the most part, the will of the people, they passed a barrage of new regulations that allow for a man to go in a little girl's bathroom, for example. You think of Title IX, for example, which was put in place by Congress to protect women and to advance women in sports, so women could be in sports. Well, now, under these new policies, I'm a man, but today I feel like I'm a girl, so I can go and get on the girls' volleyball team and knock some other girl off that wouldn't have gone on. I mean, this is just outrageously crazy, but it's where it is. And I've got, so if this does come up here, if you know anybody that's dealing with it around the state, we've got a white paper on it, we've got a policy analysis, because when they're enacting it, they don't tell the truth. And they misrepresent left and right, and they're lawyers who are supposed to, in order to be a lawyer, you're supposed to have some level of professional responsibility. It seems to be integrity, but it goes out the window, and so they'll lie after one thing after another. This responds to virtually every lie, and it's the same lies over and over again. And so when they say such and such a law says we have to do this, you say no. Here, and this is the shortcut for you. Here's a Reader's Digest version. No, the law actually says this, and let's see which side's telling the truth. Here it is. Hope this was helpful. God bless you guys. One last thing. How many people here are, I know it's a hard question. How many people here are on Facebook or use a computer? All right. If you go on that card there and sign up on the Salt Lake Facebook page and send me a text, I will give you a free electronic book of God, Man, and the Constitution that covers a lot of what we just talked about tonight. It goes much deeper. But just go to that page and like it, hit the like button, and then send me a text, and I will send you an electronic copy of this.
An email.
That'll work too, or send me an email and say I was at your thing and you said you were done, and then we'll sign you up. Promise not to get you up for money, at least not more than one time a year maybe. Just kidding. Here's a present, this is a gift from me to you. It's the Constitution and Declaration and a little essay that I wrote on some of the things we just talked about. But come up and get one of these are free. And there's a donation box here, whatever your heart says. The donations help cover the cost of me getting up here and printing books and things like that. But you're not obligated. I want you to take a free book no matter what. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does anybody have anything they want to share with the group tonight? If not, June 2nd, Representative Berkman will be here for the Republican Party Lincoln Dinner, and our next meeting is Wednesday, June 20th, with Secretary of State Mary Tender Lang. Thank you all for coming. Rod?
Just one thing, I was, as treasurer, I had a member come in tonight and wanted to give me money for dues for this next year, and I turned him down.
Okay.
Can you tell me why I might have done that?
Yes, I didn't talk about that at the beginning. We do have enough money left over this year that we are not going to collect dues next year. So anyone that's a member now is fine. So the next year, we really don't need any money. And don't forget the donation box. See you next month.
Well, this is Mike Tillis, and thank you for joining me at the May Tea Party. We're meeting at the bungalow. Hey, pal. This is Bubby Cat. It's a pretty kitty. Yeah. Shiny coat. We're recording him on a Friday morning, I'm sorry. He's been napping here for several hours. I guess now he's getting ready to make plans for the other day. Gotta take a nap. Gotta wash. Gotta run around like an idiot.
MS-13 has done heinous acts. Frankly,
That was just shines.